Alright, we are back again. Motormouth Jim. Doing some differential assembly, what I intended to do on the last video, and then just caught up talking. Alright, so we got our 4 screws stuck to this here magnet. Our ring gear, our gasket, our O-ring, our washer, locker, differential cup, washer, O-ring, and we will get all this assembled here. And I will be using some Moly or some Team Losi racing grease, some of that black high pressure grease on that O-ring, as well as the other O-ring, and on the gear itself. But this whole unit, when it's clamped together, is going to be spinning as one unit. So those O-rings aren't going to be spinning other than the whole unit being spinning. Nothing is being spun inside that O-ring. So since it's a locking differential, if it was a open differential on the back, then yeah, one wheel stops, the other wheel's going to spin, so then it would be spinning, requiring grease or whatever. But I'm putting grease in there just for you know, maintaining the life of the O-ring, putting some moisture on it, and keeping the elements out. So we will start assembling this little mess of stuff here real quick and move on to our next step, which will be the rear drive shaft. And since this side is facing down and we're kind of assembling everything in the differential cup, I'm actually starting with the differential cup. There's a little pocket in there for the O-ring. I put a little bit of that black Losi grease in there on that. Going to install the O-ring and this other washer. Slip in this differential locker, and then put the rest of this together. This O-ring is going to be seated inside the ring gear. So once again, I'm going to put little bit of Moly inside that before I install the O-ring, and probably slime the top of it before I put the washer on. Same with this side. So let me get this part assembled, and then we'll move on to that part. You know, I just put the O-ring in there and a little bit of grease in the washer. Before we put all this together, there's really nothing to keep that washer from walking around in here. So I'm going to dig into the parts bag and find the actual axle shafts and install those into here to try to keep that all assembled in one unit. Otherwise, you know, there's really nothing stopping that washer from moving around. Same with this side, there's going to be nothing stopping the washer from walking around or falling off of that connection. So other than pressure of having it all screwed together or whatever. So once we get it all screwed down and everything else, and we have the pressure of the whole assembly keeping it pinched together, then it'll be safe to pull the drive shaft halves off without worrying about those sliding out of the way. So keep in mind, even though they're not telling you to use the drive shafts, and you won't be seeing them in this picture either, they probably will be needed for the assembly of the rear locker. Alright, little step in progress. Found the axle shafts. I might have said drive shaft earlier, but I meant axle shaft. So I've got one axle shaft inserted into the drum here. Everything kind of laying in there. I'm going to put that in there real fast. Not real fast, but magnets. Yeah, this only fits in one way here. It's just going to be a matter of spinning the drive shaft or axle shaft with the cup, one or the other. There we go. So that is installed. Once again, doing this just to keep those washers from walking around. And now we're going to start working on this side. So give me a second to get this in my hand. There will be a bearing going on the back edge of this cup as well as the other one. So I'm going to put a little bead of Moly in here, or some of that black Team Losi racing grease. Insert the O-ring, a little bit more Moly on top of the O-ring, slap that washer on, as well as putting the axle shaft through, and then we'll worry about bolting it up after that. Alright, so that is all assembled on there for the time being. Time to make these two halves meet with the gasket and these 4 screws. Alright, so we got the gasket sitting in place. I have one screw going through the hole. and I'm making sure that the drive shaft, that square part, is kind of square between those 4 holes. That way it lines up into this part without a problem, and that we are making sure to get positive connection there with the screw to the hole down there. So one more second to make these two. Whoo-wee! That is some arm pump. Screwing these into this cup. Once again, stronger material. Definitely harder to thread those in there. So that is in, all assembled. I left this assembled the entire time and just kind of pushed it down on the manual as I was screwing all these screws in. Luckily my driver was long enough to make the distance with the rear drive shaft intact. And I'm actually going to leave this whole assembly just like this, just for safety reasons. I want to leave that intact as long as possible before I pull those shafts out, just because I don't want these washers to walk around. Yes, this is all tightened up, or this is tightened down onto here, but you know, I'm not too sure what the inner tolerances are on it, so I don't know if there's, you know, room for those to walk around. So we'll just leave it like this for the moment and move this off to the side and turn the page and start working on this drive shaft. So when I come back from the next pause here, I should have all this material laid out. Alright, so we went into one of these other bags that was in all contained with the ring gear and whatnot. Found all these parts in that bag, which are this screw, this little set screw. This is a M2.5 by 12 millimeter, one of those, and the set screw, the 4-4.0 or 40 by 3/32 set screw, and that is all right here, believe it or not. The little set screw is sitting next to that drum along with the pin, the screw, the little spring. So we got it all laid out right there. So we will get to assembling this little mess, which I'll start off by putting a little Loctite on that set screw and running it into that drum there, and then sliding it into the drive shaft yoke here and installing into here, inserting that pin through everything, and then snugging down that Allen wrench to hold that pin straight so it's nice and straight between the 2 points. And then we will slide on that spring. And then after all that is said and done, we will install the drive shaft last. And I don't know, I think I'll probably use some blue Loctite on this. I was using red on the other stuff, but I don't know, I might have made a mistake using red on the other stuff, but we'll see. But I'm going to install that real fast and get to working on this. Stay tuned. Alright, so we've got the pin and the yoke and the little drum and all that stuff installed. I did use red Loctite on that. I just figured because of all of the centrifugal force that's happening there. Alright, so these are set, the pins are in. It's in all the way on both sides. I made sure to pinch it together with my fingers to hold it in check. And now I'm just going to tighten down this Allen wrench set screw in here, going through one of these other side holes. Sorry about the camera focus here. So we'll get that tightened down, and then I'm going to put on that little spring retainer around the edge of it here to hold everything in place. And voila, we are all installed. We have the spring on there, which is hard to see because it's black, and it's black on black. Next step, putting this into the drive shaft and running that screw in. Also using Loctite. I'm definitely going to use blue Loctite on that guy, because I might want to get that out further on down the line. And that end of that drive shaft there, this yoke, has this little cross in it, just like on the inside one on the transmission, which is going to get mated into here. There's also a flat spot in here on one of these sides, and there's a flat spot on that shaft on one of these spots. Where are we at? Right there. So make sure to get those lined up when you insert this into here, or else you're going to have a hell of a time trying to fit that in there. So 1 second, let's put a little blue Loctite on this guy and get ready to run that thing through there. And we are back, got all this put together. Don't have the screw in just yet. A little Loctite spillage. Put it on the screw, and the screw fell off the screwdriver because that end is obviously has lost its magnetism. And it landed and spun. So we're supposed to be threading that down in here. I would be a lot happier if they provided a washer for this portion. Put a washer on there beforehand. And I don't know if I can if I have one laying around, but I'm gonna look around real quick and see if I can find a washer to put on top of that, just to spread the weight out a little bit more evenly across the bottom. So 1 second for that. I'm gonna come back, and when we come back, it'll be all together, and we'll flip pages here. Alright, we are back. Well, I ransacked my toolbox and did not come up with a washer. Of all things, you know. Mental note, Jim, get some washers. So, went through all my screws, went through all my trail finder stuff. I gave out too many washers. Last project, one of the projects I worked on over at Thanos' house, I donated a couple washers to him. I did come up with these, found these aluminum servo arms that I was talking about that I had dug up sitting in there. Might have to use one right here for the shift linkage in case this isn't quite long enough. So I figured I would just dig those out and throw them off to the side for when that time comes. So we are turning the page with the drive shaft being all assembled. Once again, no description on where to get these parts from. Well, maybe so. D2. But it doesn't say bag D2. It does say bag D1 on that side, but whatever. Common sense. And here we are assembling the rear pinion. We can wait on doing the drive shaft for a minute, I think. But we'll put the pinion together, and then we'll slap this differential in real fast here. I might even pull out the axle shafts and skip the next step. I'm sure that'll probably be the next step, next thing in line. No, then they want you to put on the mounts for the little support trusses there, and then the axle shafts. Let's see how these differ from WLtoys while we're looking at it. Bearing, plastic sleeve in between the two bearings. WL does not have a plastic sleeve, aluminum sleeve in between the two bearings. It's just bearing, gap, bearing. I put some grease in between that gap, just in case I was playing in the water. So that appears to be different, having that aluminum spacer in there. Axle shafts are definitely thicker than WLtoys, or at least compared to my WL10428A. Alright, so we are going back here, and we're going to install this ring and pinion and get all this stuff out and laid out. Start working on that. And we are back. And we've got our drive shaft sitting right here. Our 2 set screws mounted on that magnet right there. Our pinion and 2 bearings, as according to the instructions. 2 M3.05 by 3mm set screws, and 2 5 by 11 by 4mm. Looking through the camera, it's like being at the DMV doing the eye test. 5 by 11 by 4mm bearings. I preemptively put a little bit of grease on the inside of this cup for the bearing. Same on the other side. I guess I probably really didn't need to. These are sealed bearings. But, alright, well, we'll get that together. Slide all that in place. Go from there. I could probably do a bearing or two on film here with one hand. Oops. And, you know, that slid right in. finger off there. Flip this guy around. And I think I'm going to just put the bearing onto here first. And then slide this in as one whole piece. Just to make life easier for setting that bearing. Oops. There we go there. Uh-oh. Oh yeah, one-handed. Alright. Gonna have to set it down. Alright, and we are back. And I went ahead and assembled this, so that's all put together. Bearing is pressed in there. Now I said I wasn't going to do this, but I figured, well, we're here, we might as well do it, because we are following the instructions on the video. So I've got our two small set screws, set screws into said holes on either side of said drive shaft. And we are going to put it on the ring here, the ring gear on the output shaft here, on these two corresponding flat spots. Alright, one moment here to get these two together. Alrighty, we have that all tightened down and snugged down, blue Loctite on those guys. Everything spins freely. And we are moving on to the next page, and I preemptively pulled out the two bearings and all the screws. The two bearings are sitting here. We have all our screws lined up right here, which are 4 M2 by 20 millimeters and 4 M2 by, what is that? Is that 6 millimeter or is that 8 millimeter? It kind of looks like 6. We'll say 6. Yep, 6 millimeter. Had to look away from the camera. And that was in D-bag 113. So we are done with that D-bag. And I think we have everything we need, really. We got the differentials all sitting over yonder there. We're going to have to grab that and do some greasing, throw some bearings on either side of the differential, which I could have done earlier. I didn't know where the bearings were located in the bag. I could have put those on, but I figured we would just follow along with the instructions here. So I guess first things first, grab the differential, slap the bearings on there. Probably put a little bit of grease on the inside of each one of those before I do so. And we'll put this differential in here. We'll throw a bunch of grease on that. Get this other differential or pumpkin case or whatever together. Mate those two together and start buttoning her down. So one moment here to let me get this assembly ready to go. And we have returned. I put a little bit more grease in there. A little bit? Yep, I sure did. And along on the side where the ring gear is spinning. Making sure to look at the picture to see that the shock mounts, those little axle trailing arm mounts, upper linkage mounts or upper link mounts for the 4-link. Make sure that that's facing up. Make sure that the ring gear is on the right hand side. I went ahead and installed the bearings on either side of the differential cup. And in doing so, I did leave the axle shafts in place just because I was like, well, why not? I put a small layer of grease on the inside down here. I know this is spinning as one unit once again, but just, you know, whatever, precaution. And on the plastic side here, when you're slipping your bearing down onto the differential cup, excuse me for the focus here, when you're slipping the bearing down on the differential cup, you know, it goes on like partially, and you think it's on all the way because it kind of makes like a little snap, but you need to give it like one more push after that, and it'll snap in all the way. Tight fit on the plastic side. So we're going to go ahead and slip this in here. I could probably do that on camera. Just like that. And I'm probably going to give it a couple free spins off camera, maybe, I don't know, before we put this other differential half on there. I guess we could put the other differential half on. Alright, grabbing parts. Once again, like how they have nuts countersunk in here. If I knew I had a lot of excess grease to spare, I would probably put a little bit of grease in between these two halves, just for a little bit of water repellent for going in the water. So, all right, I'm gonna hold this together real quick and probably run these screws in. I imagine I'll run the screws in, and then I'll grease it up and slap the back cover on. And I already preemptively pulled out all our screws and have them lined up right here, ready to go. And we are back, and I had those 4 screws partially started into the plastic. Yes, once again, stronger plastic. Was cranking them in, just using the tip on the driver there. I just pulled the tip out of the driver and was spinning them in with my fingers. This is like one of the ends here, just spinning that with my fingers. WLtoys, once again, you can spin it in pretty much without even using the handle on the driver, but I figured I'd show you where the screws were located. They do countersink in here, so we'll commence the tightening these down. And we're back, and that is all assembled with some grease in there, with what's left of my grease. Running low. Alright, so next step is just to put the differential cover on the back, the inspection cover, and tighten that down. Real easy step there. And I should have mentioned, when you're tightening down these screws, I did kind of do like a little crisscross pattern here as I was going with that. But it is very possible to strip these out, so don't go crazy on here either. Even though it is different material, you're still fine threads, small fine thread screw with not much surface area, because all the teeth are close together, or all the threads are close together, and they're not too deep on the thread depth. So yeah, if it was a coarse thread screw, you might have a little bit more bite. Let's go ahead and slap this little cover on here. Snap that in place. And run those 4 screws in, and then it'll just be a matter of putting the ends on the side of the differential with the bearings. So one more moment here. Well, we are at 22:48, so since we're so close to 23 minutes, we'll stop right here and continue another video. And as always, thanks for watching, everybody. Very much appreciated. Any comments, any suggestions, anything like that, feel free to leave a comment. I'm always happy to read everybody's comments and stories or anything like that. Thanks for watching. We'll see you here on the next video.